Many years ago, in a small town near Ginger, there lived a young woman named Bentana, whose life could be summarized in one sentence. She worked hard while other people talked about working hard. Bentana lived in a small compound with a tin roof that sang loudly whenever rain visited. She owned a poultry shed beside her house. Inside that poultry lived more chickens than some families had relatives. Bentana loved those chickens the way teachers loved obedient students. Every morning, she woke before dawn, swept the compound, cleaned the poultry house, fed the birds, counted eggs, and then prepared to take them to the markets. Her neighbors often said that Bentana had the spirit of 10 women living inside one body. Mama Nakatso, who lived 3 houses away and who knew everybody's business, whether they told her or not, often said the same thing too. One morning, she stood near Bentana's fence watching the young woman scatter chicken feed across the ground. "Bentana!" Mama Nakatsu called loudly. "Yes, Mama Nakatsu," Bentana replied while chasing a stubborn hen away from the egg basket. "Do you ever rest?" the woman asked. Bentana laughed. "Only when the chickens learn to feed themselves." Mama Nakato shook her head slowly. "My daughter, if hard work were money, you would already own half of Ginger." Bentana laughed. "Then pray for me that the chickens become generous. They have been too stingy." Mama Nakato laughed so loudly that the birds scattered like gossip fleeing from the truth. Now, Bentana's life had not always been easy. After their parents died, she and her brother Apollos had struggled for many years. Apollos worked as a mechanic in town. Bentana started a poultry business with only 8 chickens and a stubborn belief that patience eventually rewards people who refuse to give up. Fortunately, years later, the 8 chickens became 20 and the 20 became 60. Soon, Bentana's compound looked like a small village for birds. Customers began visiting regularly and egg sellers from the markets came early to reserve crates before the rest of the town woke up. One afternoon, Mama Nakato leaned against the fence again and said, "I am beginning to suspect that you have signed a secret agreement with these chickens." Bentana wiped sweat from her forehead. "If chickens could sign agreements, I would bargain better with them." Mama Nakato laughed again. However, not everyone laughed happily when they looked at Bentana's progress. One of such people was Namazi, her childhood friend who had recently started visiting the compound more often. Namazi and Bentana had grown up together and once competed over who could climb mango trees faster without falling. But life had not treated them equally. Bentana's poultry business had grown slowly but steadily, while Namazi, on the other hand, had started several businesses that died before their second birthdays. Each time she visited Bentana, she spoke with admiration. One afternoon, while examining the chickens, Namazi said, "You are becoming a big businesswoman." Bentana laughed. "Big businesswoman? Look at my slippers. They are still arguing with the ground." Namazi smiled. "Yes, but your chickens are multiplying like politicians during election season." Bentana grinned. "They eat like politicians too." The 2 friends laughed together. But Apollo, who had returned early from the mechanic workshop that day, listened to their conversation suspiciously from the doorway. Apollo trusted engines more than people because engines usually told you what was wrong if you listened closely, but human beings, they often smile while hiding their real thoughts in their chests. The next evening, Namazi arrived again. This time, she carried a small wooden cage. Bentana looked surprised. "What is that?" Namazi placed the cage on the ground proudly and said, "Open it." Bentana bent down and lifted the small door. Inside sat a beautiful white rabbit. The animal looked clean and soft. Its fur shone like fresh cotton, and its pink nose twitched gently as it studied its new environment. Bentana gasped, "Where did you get this from?" Namazi folded her arms with satisfaction. "I saw it at the market today, and I remembered how much you love animals." Bentana lifted the rabbit carefully. The creature remained calm in her hands. "It is beautiful," she said. Namazi nodded. "It will bring good luck to your farm." Apollo stepped closer. He stared at the rabbit for a long moment. Then he looked at Namazi. "You bought this today?" "Yes," Namazi replied. Apollo's voice remained strict. "You should not bring animals into someone's home without informing them." Namazi laughed lightly. "It's only a rabbit." Bentana turned towards her brother. "You are behaving like an old man." But Apollo did not laugh. "I am behaving like someone who knows that gifts sometimes carry hidden gifts." Bentana rolled her eyes. "My brother suspects even the sunshine." Namazi laughed again. "I see. He thinks like a policeman." Bentana gently placed the rabbit into a small empty cage beside the chicken coop and told Namazi sincerely, "Thank you." The rabbit twitched his ears and settled quietly in the corner. Mama Nakato appeared at the gate just in time to see the animal. She leaned forward curiously. "What is that?" Bentana pointed proudly. "A gift." Mama Nakato squinted at the cage. "A rabbit?" "Yes," Bentana nodded. Mama Nakato folded her arms. Bentana smiled. "What does mean?" Mama Nakato shook her head slowly. "My daughter, not every gift is as innocent as it looks." Namazi laughed loudly. "It's just a rabbit, Mama Nakato." Mama Nakato stepped back from the fence and muttered, "Yes, but sometimes that is exactly how trouble enters a house." Namazi laughed again as if the old woman had just told a joke meant for children. "It is only a rabbit," she said. "It cannot overthrow a government." Bentana laughed too. "My brother has already interrogated the poor animal like a police suspect." Apollo did not laugh with them. He continued looking at the rabbit quietly. The rabbit sat calmly inside a cage. Its white fur shone under the evening light. It looked harmless enough to be used in children's stories about kindness. But still, Apollo frowned. "Where exactly did you buy it?" he asked again. Namazi waved her hand at the market. "What market?" "The roadside market." "What seller sold it to you?" Namazi looked slightly irritated. "Brother, do you want the rabbit's birth certificate too?" Bentana burst into laughter. "My brother suspects my chickens too. Don't worry." Apollo shook his head slowly and said, "Just be careful." Bentana lifted the cage and placed it beside the poultry shed. There, the rabbits will keep the chickens company. But even the chickens looked at the rabbit with deep suspicion. One of the older hens made a sharp warning sound, as if announcing that a new tenant had arrived without proper introduction. Bentana closed the cage door and told the rabbit playfully, "You behave yourself." The rabbit twitched its nose. Namazi smiled sweetly. "You'll see, it will bring you luck." Apollo walked back into the house quietly, while Mama Nakato watched the scene for a long moment before leaving. That night, as the chickens settled into their coop, the compound became quiet. The rabbit too remained inside its cage, and Bentana slept peacefully. And then, sometime after midnight, a small sound woke the dogs in the neighborhood. It was a faint scraping noise, like the gentle sound of something touching wood. The rabbit's cage door slowly opened and the rabbit hopped out. It paused for a moment beside the cage. Then it moved toward the poultry house. The moonlight followed it slowly across the compound. However, by morning, the rabbit sat inside its cage again, as if nothing had happened. Bentana woke early as usual and carried chicken feed into the coop. Then she stopped in shock. 3 chickens lay on the ground dead. Bentana frowned. What happened here? She bent down to inspect them. There was no blood or bite marks, nothing that suggested a predator had attacked, which was strange because how would 3 healthy chickens be lying still like birds that had forgotten how to breathe? Bentana scratched her head. This is strange. Apollos came outside minutes later carrying a cup of tea. What happened? He asked. 3 chickens died, Bentana replied. Apollo stepped closer and studied the birds carefully. This is unusual, he said. Bentana sighed. Well, maybe they were sick. Just then, Mama Nakato appeared at the gate as if the news had personally invited her. What happened? 3 chickens died, Bentana replied. Mama Nakato clicked her tongue. Bentana looked at her. Don't start your again. Mama Nakato pointed at the rabbit's cage. How is the new tenant? Bentana laughed. The rabbits did not conduct the funeral, please. Mama Nakato did not laugh. She just said, animals see things humans cannot see. Bentana waved her hand dismissively. My chickens probably ate something bad. As such, the day continued normally. Bentana sold eggs at the market and customers visited the poultry shed. Life moved on. But the following night, the same scraping sound returned and the rabbit's cage opened again. The rabbit hopped slowly across the compound. This time, it stopped near the chicken coop. Its ears twitched and its nose moved slowly. Then it disappeared into the darkness. Morning arrived. Bentana opened the coop again and this time 4 more chickens lay dead. Bentana stared numbly. This is not normal. Apollo came out immediately. What now? 4 more are dead, Bentana replied. Apollo's face tightened. He bent down and examined the birds again. They had no wounds, he said. Mama Nakato appeared again. The old woman looked at the birds. Then she looked at the rabbit's cage. The rabbit sat inside quietly, chewing a small leaf. Mama Nakato narrowed her eyes. That rabbit looks very peaceful. Bentana sighed. Should the poor rabbit be bothered about anything? Mama Nakato leaned on the fence and said, my daughter, sometimes the quietest thing in a compound is the one causing the most trouble. Bentana laughed small. The rabbit does not even bark. However, that evening, something else happened. Bentana noticed that the rabbit looked larger. Not much larger, but just enough to make her notice and pause. She leaned closer to the cage and murmured, were you always this big? The rabbit looked back at her calmly. Its eyes reflected the fading sunlight. Bentana stepped back slowly and smiled. That must be my imagination. From the doorway, Apollo watched her silently. His suspicion was now growing the same way Bentana's chickens had once grown. At first, he said nothing because suspicion without proof is like smoke without fire. It makes people cough, but it does not cook food. Apollo preferred facts. That evening, Bentana sat outside the house sorting eggs into baskets for the next day's markets. Mama Nakato leaned on the fence again like a woman who had permanent membership in other people's conversations. She asked, how many chickens are dead now? Bentana sighed. I lost 7 already. Mama Nakato shook her head slowly. Chickens do not just die politely like that. Bentana shrugged. I will call a veterinary officer tomorrow. Mama Nakato pointed toward the rabbit's cage. And that white gentleman? Bentana laughed. The rabbit has good manners. Apollo stepped closer. What did you say? Bentana pointed at the cage. She was asking about the rabbit. Apollo walked to the cage. The rabbit sat quietly inside, chewing a leaf as though it had no connection to the poultry tragedy happening beside it. Apollo crouched down slowly and the rabbit stopped chewing. For a moment, the two of them stared at each other. Then Apollo stood up slowly and muttered, we will watch tonight. Bentana frowned. Watch what? That rabbit. Bentana burst into laughter. My brother, you want to spy on a rabbit? Apollo nodded. Yes. Mama Nakato clapped her hands excitedly. Good idea. Bentana looked from one face to the other and said, you people need more jobs. Well, that night, Apollo did not sleep. He sat quietly in the dark corner of the compound behind the water drum where nobody could see him. As the moon rose slowly over the rooftops, the chickens slept and Bentana too slept. The whole town slept. Then, by midnight, the sound came. Apollo leaned forward curiously. The rabbit's cage door moved. It wasn't pushed from outside or opened by the wind. It simply lifted by itself, and the rabbit hopped out. Apollo narrowed his eyes. The rabbit moved across the compound slowly, not like a frightened animal or like a playful pet. It moved carefully and purposely. Then it stopped near the poultry house. Apollo remained perfectly still. The rabbit's shadow stretched across the ground under the moonlight, but the shadow looked strange now. It was longer than the rabbit's, almost human. Apollo's stomach tightened. The rabbit moved closer to the coop. A faint whisper came from the darkness. Apollo could not hear the words clearly, but he heard the sound. It was like someone breathing through dry leaves. Then the chickens inside the coop began making frightened noises. Apollo jumped up and rushed towards the coop. The rabbit disappeared instantly into the shadows. By the time Apollo reached the coop, the compound had become silent again. The cage door stood open, and the rabbit sat quietly inside it once more, as if it had never left. By morning, Bentana opened the coop and 5 chickens lay dead again. Bentana shouted loudly, "This is madness!" Mama Nakato arrived immediately. What happened now? Bentana pointed inside the coop. They are dying every night. Mama Nakato shook her head slowly. I suspect that rabbit is eating more than vegetables. Bentana looked annoyed. Please stop blaming the rabbit. Apollo spoke now. I watched it last night. Bentana turned to him. You watched what? I watched the rabbit leaving its cage. Bentana frowned. That is impossible. I saw it, Apollo insisted. Mama Nakato leaned forward eagerly. Then what happened? Apollo continued. It went to the chicken coop. Bentana folded her arms. Rabbits do not kill chickens. Apollo nodded. Yes. Then what are you saying? Bentana asked. Apollo looked toward the cage. I am saying that rabbit is not behaving like a rabbit. Bentana laughed again. My brother, you are fighting a rabbit with suspicion now. Mama Nakato leaned closer to the cage. The rabbit twitched its nose calmly. The old woman squinted at it carefully. Then she spoke. In this world, some gifts arrive with legs. Bentana sighed. You people are turning a rabbit into a village witch? Well, that evening, another strange thing happened. Bentana lifted the rabbit from the cage to clean it, and she stopped immediately. The rabbit felt heavier, much heavier now. She frowned. Were you always this big? The rabbit blinked slowly. Bentana placed it back into the cage. Apollo watched her carefully. He did not smile. His suspicion had now become certainty. Something in that cage had come into their compound with a purpose, and whatever it wanted was slowly destroying Bentana's farm. That evening, Apollo did not speak much. He sat on the wooden stool beside the doorway, watching the compound the way a watchguard watches a suspicious gate. Bentana continued sorting the eggs in silence. Her business was already bleeding. Every chicken that died was money walking out of the compound. Mama Nakato returned again. You people look like a family waiting for exam results, she said. Bentana sighed. My chickens are dying as if they have signed an agreement with death. Mama Nakato leaned closer. And that rabbit, Bentana pointed to the cage. It is eating vegetables and minding its own business. Mama Nakato shook her head slowly. My daughter, evil things also mind their business until midnight. Apollo stood up. I am going to speak to Pastor Sentongo tomorrow. Bentana rolled her eyes. Aye, you want to report a rabbit to the pastor? Apollo nodded. Yes. Mama Nakato nodded also. Good. Bentana threw her hands up. You two are planning a church meeting for a rabbit. Poor rabbit. But Apollo did not argue further. The next morning, he went to the church compound where Pastor Sentongo lived. The pastor was popularly known in the community as people visited him whenever their lives began behaving strangely. Apollo greeted him respectfully. Good morning, Pastor. Good morning, Apollo. What troubles you? Apollo hesitated. Then he said it plainly. My sister received a rabbit as a gift. The pastor smiled. That does not usually require counseling. Apollo continued. Her chickens began dying the same week. The pastor's smile faded and the rabbit behaved strangely. Apollo added. What do you mean? The pastor asked. It leaves its cage at night, Apollo explained. The pastor leaned back slowly. Who gave her the rabbit? Her friend Namazi. The pastor nodded. Okay, I'll come and see it. By afternoon, Pastor Sentongo arrived at Bentana's compound. Bentana greeted him politely. Pastor, my brother believes my rabbit needs deliverance. The pastor smiled. We will see. He walked slowly toward the cage where the rabbit sat inside, chewing leaves calmly. For a long moment, the pastor simply watched it. Then, his face changed. He did not touch the cage. Instead, he stepped back. How long has it been here? He asked. 2 weeks, Bentana replied. And the chickens? They started dying after the rabbits arrived, Bentana replied. Mama Nakato folded her arms proudly. I said these rabbits brought trouble. The pastor nodded slowly. In some dark practices, animals are used as carriers. Bentana frowned. Carriers of what? Misfortune, the pastor replied. Bentana laughed. Pastor, it is only a rabbit. The pastor looked at her pitifully. Some gifts are not gifts. Apollo stepped forward and asked, what should we do? The pastor pointed, we will watch it tonight. Bentana shook her head in disbelief. Everyone is now spying on my rabbits. However, that night, everyone in the compound watched. Pastor Sentongo sat beside Apollo near the doorway, while Mama Nakato refused to sleep and sat on a stool near the fence. Bentana watched them all like a woman living with people who had suddenly joined a detective agency. And then, when the clock struck midnight, they heard a sound and the rabbit's cage opened again. Bentana's laughter disappeared instantly. The rabbit hopped out, but this time everyone saw it clearly. The rabbit moved toward the chicken coop again. Bentana gasped, what is that? The rabbit paused near the coop and the chickens began screaming inside. Pastor Sentongo stood up quickly. In the name of God, stop! The rabbit froze. For one moment, the compound felt like it was holding its breath. Then the rabbit began shaking violently. Its body trembled as if something inside it had been disturbed. The pastor raised his voice in prayer and the rabbit suddenly collapsed onto the ground. Bentana stared in shock. Is it dead? The pastor shook his head slowly. No. The rabbit lay still for a moment. Then it suddenly jumped up. But this time, it ran toward the gate, straight out of the compound. Mama Nakato shouted, Run! That thing is running away! The rabbit disappeared into the darkness beyond the road, but nobody chased it. Bentana looked at the empty cage slowly. My chickens, she whispered. The pastor nodded. That gift was not an act of kindness. He looked toward the road where the rabbit had vanished and added, "It was jealousy." For a long moment, nobody spoke. They were still trying to process the situation. The compound felt strangely quiet, like a house that had just witnessed something it would never forget. Bentana sat down slowly on the wooden bench. "My business is finished." Pastor Sentongo shook his head. "No, it is not." Bentana looked at him. "Why do you say that?" "The thing that was draining your farm has gone," the pastor explained. Apollo crossed his arms. "But the person who sent it still exists." Mama Nakato clicked her tongue loudly. "That friend of hers, Namazi." Bentana lowered her head. "She was my friend." Mama Nakato shook her head slowly. "Some friends clap for you in daylight and dig holes for you at night." The next morning, Bentana woke up early and went to the poultry shed nervously. She was not sure of what to expect. She opened the coop carefully and, much to her relief, the chickens were alive. They were healthy. None lay dead. Bentana stared in disbelief. She checked again the following nothing, and they were all alive. Within days, the surviving birds began laying eggs again, and Bentana's business slowly started breathing like a patient who had just recovered from a long illness. But something else began happening in town. 3 days after the rabbit disappeared, news started spreading. Mama Nakato was the first to carry it. She rushed into Bentana's compound one afternoon like a woman delivering breaking news. "Have you heard?" she said. Bentana looked up from washing the feed bowls. "Heard what?" Mama Nakato leaned closer and whispered, "Namazi is sick." Bentana paused. "Sick?" "Yes, so very sick." Apollo stepped forward. "What happened to her?" Mama Nakato lowered her voice and explained. "They said she suddenly collapsed yesterday." Bentana frowned. "Collapsed?" "Yes," Mama Nakato nodded and sat down heavily on the stool. "The doctors cannot even understand the illness." Bentana remained quiet. Later that evening, Apollo returned from town with more information. He sat beside Bentana and said, "I saw Namazi." Bentana looked up slowly. "How is she?" Apollo shook his head. "She cannot walk." Bentana blinked. "What?" "She says something is moving inside her body." Bentana's hands froze. "What do you mean?" "She keeps shouting that something is scratching her inside her stomach." Mama Nakato made the sign of the cross. "That rabbit has gone back to its sender." Bentana did not say anything. Over the next few days, Namazi's illness became the biggest story in the area. Doctors ran tests, but nothing appeared wrong, and Namazi continued screaming at night. One of the neighbors said, "She's no longer sleeping, no. She keeps shouting that animals are running inside her body." Mama Nakato returned again with fresh gossip. "They say she keeps seeing a white rabbit in her dreams." Apollo shook his head. "Evil does not travel alone." 1 week later, Namazi's mother came to Bentana's house. The woman looked exhausted. Her eyes were red from crying. She stood at the gate and called, "Bentana." Bentana walked forward slowly. "Yes, ma." The woman spoke with difficulty. "My daughter confessed." Bentana remained silent. "She said she sent the rabbits. She was jealous of your success." Bentana closed her eyes slowly. The woman wiped her face and continued. "She says the person who gave her the rabbits promised that it would destroy your business slowly." Apollo spat out. "And now?" The woman shook her head weakly. "She says something has followed her home." Silence fell over the compound for some time. Then Bentana finally spoke. "I did nothing to her." The woman nodded sadly. "I know. My daughter says she wants forgiveness." Bentana stood quietly for a long moment. Then she said, Tell her I forgive her. Mama Nakato raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The woman left quietly. Bentana looked toward the empty rabbit cage. The metal door still hung slightly open. She went and closed it. Then she muttered, "Some gifts should never be accepted." From that day, the story spread through town. Parents warned their children, neighbors warned their friends, and the sentence people repeated most often was that before you collect any gift from someone, first ask yourself, why are they gifting you? Thank you for watching the story. Kindly share your thoughts about the story with me in the comment section. What lesson did you learn from this story? Kindly share the story out with your loved ones and give the story a thumbs up. Subscribe to this channel if you've not done so by now. Until I bring another story your way. Bye.